Christina Samson e Isabella Martini, perché sono anche colleghe del dipartimento dove io afferisco, nonché dell'unità di ricerca a cui tutte e tre apparteniamo. Christina Samson è professoressa associata di lingua inglese, lingua e traduzione linguistica, come si chiama adesso, presso l'Università di Firenze, prima afferente al Dipartimento di Economia, ormai da non mi ricordo quanti anni, ma molti nel Dipartimento, prima LEUI e poi Forlilpsi. Il suo ambito di ricerca focalizza in gran parte sulla sociolinguistica, la linguistica dei corpora e la pragmatica storica, in relazione, diciamo così, anche ad aspetti particolari come per esempio la definizione di genere e diversi generi letterari. Per esempio, una bella, diciamo, parte della sua produzione si è incentrata sull'analisi delle lettere, in particolare di scrittrici, appunto di donne, come una parte molto importante su come utilizzare appunto il corpus linguistics nell'analisi pragmatica. E questo filone di ricerca l'ha portato avanti prima nell'ambito del discorso, soprattutto economico, ora diciamo in modo particolare per quanto riguarda la stampa. Vi voglio ricordare, fra l'altro, il fatto che appunto Cristina ha fondato presso il nostro dipartimento l'unità di ricerca sulla appunto Corpora of Contemporary History English Research, ha cofondato The Lexicon of Heritage, che è un'altra unità di ricerca, e ha coordinato praticamente la formazione di un portale per quanto riguarda l'heritage fiorentino, accessibile non solo diciamo accademici ma anche a professionisti. Questo intervento si inserisce nell'ultimo, nel senso cronologico, ambito di ricerca di Cristina, che è appunto il PRIN 2022 dell'unità di ricerca di Firenze, che è focalizzato su il discorso e i contesti del well-being nella storia dell'inglese. Isabella si inserisce, diciamo, quasi più recentemente, ma in questo filone di ricerca è stata e adesso ricercatrice di lingua e traduzione inglese, anche se ora si chiama lingua e traduzione ancora si chiama, o si chiama linguistica e traduzione, insomma, comunque sia quella disciplina. In teoria le dovrei sapere molto meglio, ma di fatto non lo so. Presso il nostro dipartimento, ha ottenuto un dottorato in lingue straniere presso l'Università di Pisa, e i suoi campi di ricerca focalizzano su diversi aspetti tra la traduzione e i translation studies, ma più recentemente anche lei sulla la pragmatica storica, la corpus linguistics e soprattutto l'analisi del discorso giornalistico dal punto di vista diacronico nella stampa britannica. Scusate. È membro anche lei dell'unità di ricerca coordinata da Cristina, oltre ad essere membro dell'Associazione Italiana degli Studi Inglesi. Tra i suoi argomenti di ricerca, diciamo, più presenti nella sua produzione, ci sono studi che analizzano da vari punti di vista la presentazione del genocidio armedio attraverso la stampa. Un altro campo di ricerca è invece, diciamo così, l'analisi del discorso, soprattutto in ambito medico e in ambito pediatrico, e come pure studi invece, diciamo così, più diacronici della presentazione della nascita, per esempio, in epoca edoardiana. Questi due interventi, come lo dicono il titolo, si inseriscono in questo praticamente PRIN entrambi, e quindi spero di iniziare questo bel dialogo. Grazie per l'attenzione.
Share the results of activity for this PRIN. Now, my talk today is basically about, it's called Transparency versus Secrecy, the representation of Italian secret societies in 19th century British letters to the editor. And it is part of not only of the print, but also of the of my ongoing research on the letters to the editor and the linguistic features and the representation in letters to the editor. Now, let me see. Okay. Now, I'm trying to keep it as, let's say, as less technical as possible, because I'd like to share some questions that I focused on in this activity, and which is basically the paradox that I have isolated whenever talking about secret societies. That is to say, transparency versus secrecy. I focused on Carbonari, and I focused on the secret societies and their representation for the well-being, for the social well-being during the unification of Italy. And the idea was, how come that secret societies who are supposed to be secret find themselves so much in the news nowadays and at that time? Now, some preliminary questions that I'd like to share with you. If secret societies then and now are supposed to preserve their status of secrecy, why would they be not only mentioned, but sometimes even openly discussed in the press? Was making secret societies newsworthy part of a broader strategy to frame their representation within the socio-political considerations of the role in the socio-political scenario of the time? Were secret societies also mentioned to stimulate the interest of readers of the time for gossip and entertainment? And to what extent were these representations made entertaining? My approach combines corpus linguistics and discourse analysis to study the linguistic patterns which were used to represent the secret societies most active in Italy in the 19th century. Originally, the first part of this study focused on Carboneria only, but then inevitably it also extended to Freemasonry as well. And this study was focused, was conducted on a corpus of letters to the editor of the British national and local press, which was constructed specifically for the purpose of the print. And of course, this corpus underwent the analysis of recurrent words and phraseology related to collocational patterns, concordances, and clusters, as it is the usual methodology. The idea is not only to contribute to the study of the linguistic features of letters to the editor from a historical news discourse perspective, but also to understand how the social well-being of the time was constructed and represented in the press. Now, two main research questions which are focused on this, on which the study focuses today. Which recurrent linguistic constructs express the representation of Freemasonry and Carboneria in letters to the editor in the British press? And is the representation of Freemasonry and Carboneria promoting a certain ideological stance? How it is connected to the historical and political events of the time? Is it used to advance a specific political propaganda? And how is it made to entertain the public? Now, a little bit of context. Everybody knows what Carboneria is. And it is defined as an informal network of secret, liberal, and democratic revolutionary society, allegedly active in Italy from about 1800 to 1831, which took part to important events in the Italian Unification or Risorgimento. The idea was to liberate the Italians from a centuries-long rule that had fragmented the country, to chase away the foreign rulers, create a unified nation, and establish a constitutional government. Now, the idea, we all know about the failed Moti Carbonari, their involvement in the revolution, in the Bourbon Restoration. But what I'd like to focus more is the idea of how they were constructed. So the first lodges originated in Naples before 1810, and they cut across social boundaries. However, women could not be Carbonari, and there were an affiliated organization that was called Giardiniere, and it was based on humble symbolism. So being a Carbonaro and participating in the rituals and symbolism comprised a domain of belonging. Now, speaking about transparency, this is what is nowadays available on the internet. However, is it accurate? How do we know if this is real or not, if this is actually their symbols and their flags. We would go back to the flags as well. Now, whenever we search for the Carbonari flags, for instance, we have two different flags which have a different position of the colors. Then there is an alleged symbol of Carboneria and an alleged page of their statuti. Nowadays, however, there's also a website, and basically we can also ask to be received as Carbonari if we are interested. So much so for the secrecy of this society. Now, when I said that I had to also involve the Freemasonry is because the linguistic analysis, now I'm anticipating a little bit the content of what's coming next, inevitably also mentioned Freemasonry. Here I'm just basically listing some dates, the most important of which is the 24th of June 1717, which is conventionally acknowledged as the establishment of the so-called modern/speculative Freemasonry, to distinguish it from the ancient operative Freemasonry. And this date coincides with the foundation of the Grand Lodge in London, wherein 4 already established lodges merged. So it's a conventional date. And what follows are the years of the some other important dates, the first printed edition of the Constitutions of the Freemasons by James Anderson, and it's printed, which means that it could circulate. And so going towards transparency. I'm sorry, I have an assistant, which is quite, present whenever I speak from home. And in 1723, the news of a lodge was founded in Girifalco, named Fidelitas, and then other lodges. And then there were more and more lodges, news of more lodges being found around Italy. However, this was met with a series of papal bans on Freemasonry and excommunications. Now, connections, secrecy, hierarchical structure. Freemasonry aimed to influence institutions and culture through the bourgeois and intellectual elite, while the Carbonari pursued a more radical and clandestine strategy focused on political revolution and conspiracy. So both Freemasonry and the Carbonari saw the proximity of key personalities, such as Giuseppe Mazzini, who was never a Freemason, although he was constantly contacted by Freemasons and asking him to join one or more lodges, and Filippo Buonarroti, Giuseppe Garibaldi, who's also active in Freemasonry. And then nowadays, after the failed uprising of 1820, 21, and 1831, the Carbonari were heavily repressed. Freemasonry managed to survive and reassert itself despite the several, let's say, historical events that saw them targeted. Not the last, the last was being the fascism, which placed a ban, and several Freemasons were also sent to concentration camps. Nowadays, speaking about information is freely available online and in multiple publications. And here are some screenshots from, for instance, the Grande Oriente d'Italia with Che cos'è la massoneria. So as you can see, there's information is readily available. Gran Loggia d'Italia, and also the Ordine Massonico Tradizionale, and there are many more, which tend to be wanting to communicate. Now, letters to the editor. Why the letters to the editor? Letters to the editor have been slightly overlooked over the past decades in terms of their genre, as a part of specific genre of news discourse genre. However, they have had a fundamental role in the construction of news discourse in newspapers since the onset of the printed press. And what's even more important, they were usually written by influential members of the reading public to share their comments and personal opinions and openly express their ideological stance, which is usually in line with the editorial stance of the newspaper. They were mainly studied from a broader sociological, historical, and political perspective in terms of their construction and performance of cultural citizenship, their contribution to the media discourse, and as a social practice for the construction of the public, which, in terms of our research for the PRIN, is specifically important. Published letters to the editor include materials which are of interest to the readers, and at the same time they reflect their views and attitude. They're also used to keep a certain topic newsworthy for the reading public, and they allow to better understand the agenda of a newspaper on a specific topic. Some selection criteria have been identified as being relevant, brief, entertaining, and authoritative. However, Karen Jorgensen, who, let's say, elaborated these criteria, based her study on contemporary letters to the editor and not on historical letters to the editor, which are actually present different features. The idea is that letters to the editor represent and express democratic participation and the public engagement in both early and recent news discourse. And also, since they tend to express the opinions of their writers, the evaluative language, the features of evaluative language are prominent in letters to the editor and are really worth studying. I'm checking the time in the meanwhile. Now, the methodology is combined quantitative and qualitative, corpus-driven approach, discourse analysis, and corpus-assisted discourse analysis of language in context. Keywords were analyzed of the corpus that was constructed, and the objective extraction of lexis made it possible to extract statistically significant co-occurrence patterns in the texts, to which a search for non-obvious meanings through the analysis of extended portions of contextual evidence was performed. The analysis of discourse analysis, was focused on grammar words and phraseology, and the analysis of their features. Phraseology, the definition describes a general tendency of words and group of words to occur more frequently in some environments than in others. And also an attention to semantic prosody, that is to say, the connotational/evaluative meaning of words following whether viewed as the expression of a consistent discourse function or a consistent co-occurrence of linguistic items or types of linguistic items, to understand the meanings which are not almost immediately available on the surface of the words. I will skip to this because this is more in-depth about methodology, and I'll go to the letters to the editor and secret societies, which was the corpus I analyzed for my part of my PRIN research, which I named LESS, pun intended, Letters to the Editor on Secret Societies. It was drawn from the Times and the Sunday Times Online Archive and from the British Newspaper Archive to have both the broadsheet view and the local view of the news. It's a specialized corpus, 200 letters for around 180,000 tokens. And it's important to mention that this corpus kept the duplicated letters to the editor in different newspapers. What do I mean by that? It was customary to publish the same letter in different newspapers, usually in the local press. Therefore, it's important not to eliminate duplicate letters because they appear in different newspapers. And so this is it reinforces the idea of how important these letters were. The letters were selected with search words Carbonari and Freemason, including Freemason, Freemasonry, and Freemasons, for basically the entire 19th century. And it was analyzed using the AntConc software version 4.3.1, which was released in 2024. Now, some findings. This is the list of the keywords of the corpus extracted by comparing it to the corpus of late modern English text extended edition. And what emerges is, of course, the most important letters to the editor. The most frequent keyword is Carbonari, followed by Freemasonry, Freemasons, Italy editor, and at some point also secret. Now, what follows are some findings, some linguistic findings in terms of grammar, discourse and grammar organization and lexical patterns. So, the first one, Carbonari, as it is possible to see, these are some concordance lines extracted from the corpus using AdConc. The most frequent phraseological, the most frequent grammatical pattern of discourse organization in this case is composed of noun phrase and then post-modified by the specification of the Carbonari and the Carbonari and noun phrases. Now, this is indicative of a very specific representation of Carbonari, which is usually dependent on something else, on some different other lexical item. Carbonari is mentioned only once in the corpus, and so that's why it was not actually super relevant. What's important to notice is that Carbonari is always pre-modified by the definite article, which means that there was a shared knowledge about Carbonari. Some examples, the most frequent left modifying noun phrases, so the head of the noun phrase of the Carbonari, of the noun phrase plus of the Carbonari, are related to the organization and symbols of the secret society: constitution, flag, institution, member, object, principles, and society, which are not per se either positively or negatively connoted. And so they are basically contributing to the disclosure of information about Carbonari. Another thing which is to be noted is that some of these letters are signed anonymously by authors who are self-professedly saying that they belong or that they are a Carbonaro. The same thing happens for Freemasons. Now, however, within the same construction, the noun phrase pre-modifying the prepositional phrase of the Carbonari sees more negatively connoted noun phrases: destruction, machinations, and then partisans, repressor, retreat, work, for instance. So this means that the representation of the Carbonari is not just a positive disclosure of information, but is also ambivalent. So on the one hand, there is a positive representation of the Carbonari. However, at the same time, there is also a negative, really negative representation of the Carbonari, particularly when it reflects the political, ideological orientation according to which Carbonari are to be associated with a negative outgroup and a revolutionary negative outgroup. Now, moving on to Freemasonry, the same grammatical pattern of discourse of organization is to be seen. So it's always noun phrase of Freemasonry. Freemasonry is, however, so there is another recurrent grammatical pattern of discourse of organization, which defines what Freemasonry is, and then Freemasonry to the and on Freemasonry plus 2. So if we were to analyze the most recurrent phraseology where Freemasonry is mentioned, is again noun phrase of Freemasonry. And again, we can see that of Freemasonry, so the noun phrase pre-modifying the prepositional phrase is usually associated to the organization and symbols: subject, order, principle, progress, grades, institution, traditions, and uses. However, there are very, very few negative words associated with Freemasonry and also with Freemasons. It's as if the institution is actually mentioned to as a support. So the ideological stance supports Freemasonry. It is seen as a positive presence within not only the UK, not only England, but also Italy. in opposition to the church. The same thing happens when, instead of the institution, the occurrences concern Freemasons, so the people actually, the people composing Freemasonry. And the idea is that whenever they are mentioned to reinforce the legitimacy of Freemasonry, legalized, authorized, the reputability, the positive qualities and codes of conduct, and their political orientation that allows them to support the order of the kingdom. Therefore, if Carbonari are depicted as, let's say, ambivalent, seditious, Freemasonry and Freemasons usually have a positive connotation that opposes the negatively connoted Catholic Church in Rome. Now, and I'm going very briefly towards the conclusion with the last examples. Secrecy. However, secret was a keyword. Therefore, I had to go to look into how secrecy was linguistically combined. And here, as you can see, there are more negatively evaluative words. Intrigues, machinations, meetings, murderers means. So basically, if on the one hand, there are these two institutions, Carboneria and Freemasonry, which are positively represented, the fact that they're perceived as secret immediately adds an image of negativity on them. And this is evident whenever we have a look at the phraseology in which secret occurs. Action, bond, conspiracy, government, hostility, means, powers, schools, spies, societies, machination, consideration, worth, members, existence, fruit, confederates. So there are the fact of being secret, which is also an accusation of the Catholic Church and the Jesuits, immediately draws the line between what is positive and what is negative. And now I'm going towards my conclusions. There are more and more results, but basically this is what it is. And in terms of concluding remarks, let's say that the analysis of the corpus evidence depicts an instrumental transparency of information organized along a polarized ideological representation of the Carbonari. They are mentioned to draw parallels, and they're used as comparative reference for negatively connoted political events. However, voices of the Carbonari, either real or seemingly real, they're used to inform the reading public of their features and intentions. And they are informative, transparent, and positively connoted in terms of ideological stance. One thing which is important, because it is important to analyze the linguistic occurrences, but also it's important also to have a look at what does not occur and what should be there. Active verbs do not feature as recurrent right collocates of Carbonari. That they don't act. They are rarely the subject of an action. They're not given prominence for what they do, but for what they represent in terms of their association with other events or political entities. And Freemasonry, again, it's an instrumental transparency of information organized along a polarized ideological representation, which is mostly positive, though. What is most important is that, again, there are real or seemingly real voices of Freemasons to inform the reading public of their features and intentions. Their strongly evaluative connoted language used to oppose the Catholic resolutions against Freemasonry. And however, when negatively represented, there's a strong condemnation of Freemasonry, which is expressed in the letter to the editor. And one occurrence also mentions equals them as pestilential sect. However, there are some Catholic-oriented newspapers, and so it's kind of let's say, evident where they're going. And also, as with Carbonari, active verbs do not feature as recurrent collocates. Freemasonry and Freemasons are rarely the subject of an action. However, Freemasonry is indeed a frequent co-occurrence, which express a tendency to define and describe its features. Secrecy, again, is also a semantic field to move harsh accusation against both sides, secret societies and towards the Catholic Church. Letters to the editors are published to the editor are published to either defend or condemn the members of secret society, to discuss their role in internal politics, and also to assimilate with them with other political societies, communists and socialists, for both Carboneria and Freemasonry, and with their responsibility for the social unrest as well as for the social well-being or the lack of well-being in Italy at the time. And it is interesting, this excerpt from the letters to the editor titled Giunta Apostolica in the Morning Chronicle in 1823. Be so good, sir, as to insert this letter in your journal, which is so much the friend of humanity, and thus make known the secret intrigues of the despotism which now oppresses but too much the beautiful Italy. However, there's also a defense of secret societies, and at the same time, secrecy collocates with negative language, and it is used to draw parallels with other secret organizations. So again, what emerges in conclusion is a very ambivalent representation and also more questions. So where is the truth, and who will discover the truth that lies behind the representation of these societies? So these are my references.
I will continue, let's say, from another perspective, the analysis of letters to the editor on the unification. So Isabella spoke about the Carbonari that contributed to the unification and helped a lot to achieve the unification of Italy, but at the same time, there was not only the Carbonari, but also other groups in England and also Italian groups in England at the time that were, let's say, advertising the unification and the reasons to achieve this unification. And so what I'm analyzing are the letters that were published at the time in the British press. Now, again, the purpose is to analyze a corpus. This corpus is separate from the one that Isabella worked on, and it's a particular corpus that focuses on letters to the editor on the unification. So the search word, the keyword was unification of Italy, and then Garibaldi and Mazzini. The assumption is that these letters provide not only factual information, but also personal perspectives on and reactions to the facts that are referring to the events of the time. So obviously there is a strong reference, a socio-political reference to the instability that takes place approximately from 1815 till 1871, although we know that in history, let's say this battle for the independence of Italy started way before, already towards the end of the 1700s. So my research questions were, first of all, which were the keywords that are related to the representation of the unification in the English press, but not only, also the recurring clusters. And what do we mean by this? Clusters are the most frequent words that collocate together with the keywords. So what I did, I went and searched, so I went one step ahead and I searched the phraseology or the semantic prosody of these clusters. So how the clusters themselves collocate at a wider level within the letters. So, and in this way, what is very important is we see how meaning is construed while shaping social involvement in England for the well-being of Italy. Just a few words on Risorgimento. As you know, it's a 19th century political movement that emerged already after the 1820s Napoleonic Wars. Let's say Napoleon was an inspirer of the unification and the freedom of Italy. The Young Italy movement by Giuseppe Mazzini was founded in 1831, and it gave, let's say, a strong boost to the achievement of this movement. We see that in 1848, I'm being very brief, I'm not going to too many details regarding the history. I'm just giving you the main dates. 1848, we have Garibaldi with his Italian Legion fighting for the Risorgimento in the War of Independence against the Austrians. And that's, let's see, that's when all these events start getting a bit, let's say, having a stronger impact, more and more a stronger impact on the Italian public. And that's where more and more Carbonari get involved. And we see that the myth of the Italian Risorgimento becomes, at this point, more and more popular among the British readers. And it has an influence on the public opinion. And let's say since the 1850s, there was a dissemination of Italian national patriotic discourse in social events. We see more and more social events being organized and publicized by Philo-Italian associations and groups of English radicals, which played an extremely active role in involving the British public. Now, their focus was on the fact that Italian historical cultural heritage was at the basis of an idea of progress that justified the need for Italy's nationalist independence. Now, Italian independence obviously was seen as a crucial cause of freedom and justice, because it embodied the good opposed to despotism, against oppression and foreign control. So it was, let's say, at the time considered an extremely important, something of great value for, let's say, the ideologies of the time. And these groups spread the idea of the Italian unification as something extremely right at a moral level and not only at an historical level. We see that in 1859, after Piedmont, Sardinia allied with France, eventually Austria was defeated. So we have the collapse of the autocratic Austrian regime in northern Italy. And eventually, in 1860, we have Garibaldi that led the expedition of the Thousand and annexed Sicily, southern Italy, Marche and Umbria, till we reach 1861, the following year, when the Kingdom of Italy was proclaimed. Now, we know that 10 years had to pass, but till when eventually Venezia and the former Papal states, including Rome, were incorporated. And this followed the Franco-Prussian War. And eventually, in the parliament, let's say, unification of Italy was completely declared. Now, why are these, as Isabella said, why are these letters to the editors so important? Because they are a privileged tool of civic engagement that selects issues which were newsworthy at the time, but newsworthy not only just for the sake of news, but mainly for economic and political reasons. And that mark, therefore, a public significance for the rest of the population. So in this case, I'm referring to the English population, but also obviously this implies the Italian population. And why were these letters so important? Because they provide a comment on the events that are important to the newspaper's agenda, because we have to bear in mind that newspapers had an interest in selling and making a profit. So therefore, each newspaper had a particular agenda. These letters publicly express complaints, but that demand a reply. And these complaints, in this case, were also linked to the patriots, Italian patriots, and they contribute, therefore, to the social transformation. So a social transformation, which initially was in England, but had obviously an impact on Italy. So the language within letters to the editor can become, therefore, an instrument of domination and of social power, because as we know, and I draw on Wodak and Fairclough and Van Dyck, they become an instrument of domination because language is a suitable medium for covering and uncovering hidden ideologies which are intended to construct social norms and values. So this is very important because, as we will see, these letters to the editor were used for propaganda because it was very important to reach many classes of the English society in order to gain and collect funds for the Italian patriots and for, in particular, for Garibaldi himself. So we see that ideology is fundamental, is a foundational belief that underlines the shared social representation of specific kinds of social groups. And this is very important when we consider the groups that were involved in supporting the Italian patriots. So letters to the editor have been, as we know, have been studied mainly for their political function to express democratic participation. They also include sociological features across different historical and cultural contexts, but they rarely have been the subject of linguistic analysis, in particular of the unification of Italy in the English press. I know that there have been studies, linguistic studies of some letters in the Italian newspapers, but however, to date, there isn't any particular work on the letters to the editor on the unification in the English press. So let's say this corpus is highly innovative and it's part of the print. So what we did, we collected a corpus that amounts to approximately 260,000 words. There are more or less 400 files. These were downloaded from the British Newspaper Archive in particular, but also from the Times Archive. And I just mentioned that the Times Archive contains letters that were openly against the unification, openly against Mazzini, because obviously the Times is more of a conservative newspaper, even today. So I just go briefly along the methodology that was adopted. It's a corpus-driven approach integrated with discourse analysis. What do we mean by corpus-driven approach? Is that we don't decide in advance which words we are going to analyze, but it's the corpus by applying Wordsmith's tools, 7, that provides us with a list of the most frequent words that are used in the corpus. And then what I did, I focused on the keywords, as I said, and in order to obtain the keywords, I had to use, make a comparison with a reference corpus. In this case, it's a corpus of late modern British English extended version from the University of Leuven. And this allows me to generate a keyword list, So the most frequent keywords that appeared, I'm just have 7 here, but there are many more. So these are the most frequent. So we see from the first word ranking. So we have Italy, as we can well imagine. Garibaldi, Italian, government, cannot, Italians, unity, etc., but we don't have time to go through all. So what I did, so there was Italy. So I went and searched. Also, this is automatic. You just go on to concordances of Italy, and then you generate the clusters. And this is the most frequent clusters that appears, is the unity of Italy. So we see this is the real focus of these letters, the unity of Italy. But what happens? How is this cluster used in the letters? Because this is the main point. So I've just chosen very few letters due to the limited time that we have. So a very interesting letter was this. Earl Russell told some of his friends when he was at Milan that Your Excellency was, from among the members of the British cabinet, one of the foremost in defending the unity of Italy, and that therefore the Italian patriots might rely upon you within the utmost confidence. So what do we have here? We see that these letters, and this is why I gave my talk that particular title, we have many voices in the letters. So we don't have just the letter writer that expresses his or her thought. But what we have here is, for example, the point of view of Earl Russell that told some of his friends that Your Excellency was one of the foremost in defending the unity of it. And so we have here 3 people, okay, that are involved. We have Earl Russell that talks, so there's a narration, there's reported speech of what he says about Your Excellency, so there's reference to a second person, and yet there is the writer of the letter that is referring on this. But what happens? We have the idea, the personal perspective of the writer that appears through what the others think and say. So this is very interesting. So you have the words that are reported, and when we have evaluation, so we don't have only narration, but we have evaluation, because Earl Russell said that this person was one of the most foremost in defending the unity of Italy. So we have an evaluation of Your Excellency, and at the same time, therefore, the Italian patriots might rely upon you with the utmost confidence. So what happens? This person generates high reliability. So we really have information which is loaded with personal perspectives, but at the same time, this generates a unity, okay? What we call a togetherness, of us, Italians, English, that hope for the unification of Italy. So there is a united togetherness, okay? But the things change in another letter. If we have a look at this, you have Monsieur de la Gournier, after endeavoring to prove that the unity of Italy is impossible, he proceeds to assert that, if realized, it would introduce serious perturbation in European order, and the national power of France would be compelled to demand compensation from Italy and to change established territorial limits in order to guarantee herself against several powerful neighbors. So what we have here, a total twist, okay? So again, we have description, so we have a narration, okay? A narration of these facts, but this is from the perspective not only of the writer of the letter, but of this Frenchman who was a politician at the time, and that in this case, the unity of Italy is seen as something impossible. So it's evaluated as something highly negative. But why? Because the togetherness, us, is the French togetherness against the other, which in this case becomes Italy. So we see that there is a twist in the evaluation that's given of the unity. It's interesting to see also they're already talking at the time many times about European order, which brings these letters to be really not old-fashioned any longer. But another keyword that we saw, the second most frequent keyword, is Garibaldi. Now, in this case, the cluster is of Garibaldi. And here we have a narration and conversation. So what we have is we don't have a real definition of we, but here we can understand it from the text. So we may add that the present organization is formed at the express desire of Garibaldi with the view, to quote his own words, of indicating to the British public the aims of the Italian patriots. Subscriptions will be collected in England and, after defraying all necessary expenses, will be handed over to the Central Italian Committee at Genoa, presided over by Garibaldi himself. This is the way to show sympathy for Italy in a present hour of depression, and the promoters of both the Italian and the English schemes are the men against whom Sir George Bower brings railing accusations. So here we have at once another perspective. So what we have is we may add that the present, so this is someone, it's the group that was called the Fund for Garibaldi. It was a group that was created that was collecting contributions for Garibaldi in order to buy arms and attract volunteers. So this is expressing the desire of Garibaldi, indicating that the British public needs to become aware of what the patriots need. And what's very interesting here is that there is the attempt to underline that what is said is authentic, okay, and it is reliable. So there is trustworthiness that is being expressed because it's Garibaldi himself that is going to handle all these funds, and that's presiding over the committee itself in Geneva. But this is a way not only to show the sympathy of these promoters for both the Italian and the English schemes, but it also shows togetherness, us, again, unity against those that were against the unification of Italy in England itself. And here we have the name of this person who had written also frequently on the Times. I'm not going to go this. I don't know. I think I'm late. I can't see the time. Another most frequent keyword is Italian. And now what's very interesting here is of the Italian. And there are many, many letters on of the Italian, how this cluster is used for many, many different meanings. However, one is very interesting here because it says, it's necessary that Europe at large should listen to the voice of the Italian people, which voice is the daughter of the fatality of history, that in other words, of the will of God. Como written with a K, is to Italy what the heart is to a man, as that and as without the heart, man cannot live. So Italy without, in this case, it's Rome, actually not home, cannot exist. Italy will have Rome at any cost. So what we see here, again, we have a narration, but the discourse becomes even more persuasive because not only there is an appeal to listen to the voice of the Italian people, so the whole population of Italy that's demanding, that's asking, that is battling for its unification. And what's very interesting here, we also have a definition that is the importance of Como, so northern Italy, it's equal to the heart of a man, and a man cannot live without a heart. The same thing, Italy without, not only without Rome, Como, but also without Rome cannot exist. So therefore, and what happens even more is Italy will have Rome at any cost. So this is really being a very strong, persuasive appeal to the social, for the social well-being of Italy and the rest of Europe, but it's a plea for the British public. So to conclude, I'm not going to go further because I think it's getting a bit late. I'm going over time. So what do we see in these letters? They are characterized at a linguistic level by narration, by a conversation, because what's very important, these letters respond to previous letters. So we have a conversation, so there is a dialogue, but not only we have reported speech, we have appeals to the public. So therefore, what we have is the tendency to have a positive evaluation of the unification of Italy. Obviously, we have also negative evaluations by those who were against the unification. And what emerges is a polarized ideology that, in other words, we have a contrast between us, British and Italians. There is constantly this us of British and Italians, and the other are frequently the French, the Austrians, and the Papal States. And therefore, battling for social, political stability meant striving for a sense of community while expressing emotions. We see also that these letters are loaded with strong emotions, especially when they appeal to the public. They generate, in turn, public emotional reactions, and this leads in the end to a social consciousness of the importance of the unification and the well-being of the unification itself that would have been granted to the Italian population with freedom. These are my references, so only some of the references, and thanks for your attention.